All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us over your lunch hour to learn about the LYNX Silverline light rail updates. As part of today's virtual public meeting, we'll be giving a presentation on the LYNX Silverline and some refinements and phasing updates. And then we'll end the virtual public meeting with a Q&A, your chance to ask questions of our project team. But to kick us off for today's public meeting, I would like to introduce CAT's CEO, John Lewis.
Thank you, Julianne, and good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to officially say welcome to our fourth round of public engagement for the LYNX Silverline refinements. I'm John Lewis, Chief Executive Officer for the Charlotte Area Transit System. Over the past year and a half, our team at CATS has worked closely with you, the community, to refine this future light rail alignment. While we're nearing the end of this portion of the refinement process, it is so important that you, the public, participate by giving us feedback, asking questions, giving your opinions on the decisions that we've been making over the last 18 months and will continue into the future. This afternoon, we have some important updates to share with you. The project team will present 5 additional refinements to the current locally preferred alternative. They will also share some early concepts on project phasing. We're at a critical phase of our pre-project development, and I urge each one of you, our community members, to provide feedback on our work thus far. With that, I'd like to introduce our project manager, Andrew Mock, to get us started with the presentation. Andy?
Thank you, John, and thank you for the community for attending this meeting at noon on a Wednesday. Appreciate that. As John kind of laid out perfectly the agenda for today. But before we get into that, I wanted to kind of give a couple notes for virtual meetings for folks who, both panelists and participants. For panelists, please remain on mute until the Q&A portion of the meeting. For participants, please log into your Gmail or YouTube account to participate in the live Q&A at the end of the meeting. Log off any organizational VPNs for best quality streaming, and post questions in the chat box to be answered at the end of the meeting. Just to remind the public who the team that's tasked with putting forward the LYNX Silverline project are. It's led by myself, Andy Mock. I'm the Senior Project Manager for the LYNX Silverline, with Jenna Nichols, the Deputy Project Manager. Julianne Sheldon is the CAT's Public and Community Relations Manager. John Howard is our Silverline TOD Study Project Manager, and Jason Lawrence is our Rail Trail Project Manager. As part of the broader Silverline program, there's also not just light rail, but there's also land use improvements, which is part of the TOD program, that vision around the station, and then the rail trail, which is seeking to develop a vision for light rail, for a rail trail that runs along light rail along the entire length. Just wanted to give that color. So for the purpose of today's meeting, wanted to provide a brief update for where we are with the Silverline today. Present 5 potential refinements that we would want any public feedback on before we go to the Metropolitan Transit Commission in November and ultimately in January for action. Propose a preliminary phasing strategy that we wanted any feedback that public might have, and then to do a live Q&A, which the last part of the meeting will include. So before we zoom in, it's always kind of good to just kind of zoom out for a second and really talk about the LYNX Silverline as one piece of a broader mobility puzzle that we're trying to solve for the corridors from Belmont to Indian Trail through the city of Charlotte, town of Matthews, and town of Stallings. And solving that puzzle is the LYNX Silverline and all the aspects of the broader program, including the TOD and the rail trail, but also the more focused planning groups that are looking into the broader jurisdictions, including Gaston and Union MPO, the town of Matthews planning, the city of Charlotte's planning through the comp plan, the broader transit plans happening through the 2030 transit corridor system plan, connect beyond the regional program, and of course NCDOT projects. This Silverline is adjacent to many NCDOT projects along the entire length. So there's a lot of interface between NCDOT and CATS. So at a high level, the Silverline was adopted, the refined locally fertile alternative was adopted in April 28th of this year. And it's a 29-mile alignment with 29 stations. And it runs from Belmont in the west in Gaston County, along Wilkinson Boulevard, through and around Center City, Charlotte, out Independence Boulevard, transitioning to Monroe Road, through the town of Matthews, and into Stallings and Indian Trail. And as part of that, there will be maintenance facilities required to accept and maintain the new fleet of vehicles that will be purchased with the project. So we get a lot of questions about the overall life cycle. How long does it take these projects to get built? So we really wanted to take a moment and just kind of give a broad overview of kind of the steps that it takes to get from the very beginning and conception of the ideas to revenue service. So the beginning is with planning. Now, there's the planning along the Silver Line has been going on for quite some time. Planning for transit in Independence Boulevard and Wilkinson Boulevard has been going on for 20 plus years. So that has been happening all, leading up to now. And that included system planning and major investment studies and alternatives analysis. A lot of hard work and a lot of good vision has been put behind the goals for transit along these corridors. Stepping off from that, we've entered in what's called pre-project development. And that's really the predecessor work and study that's necessary to enter the formal federal process, which is called project development. So, the steps to get into project development is really focused on what you feel comfortable, what amount of work you need to do to feel comfortable to enter into project development, because project development needs to be complete within 2 years. So it's kind of a hard federal requirement to be done with that in 2 years. So depending on the complexity of your project, you need to do more work up front to be prepared to enter in so you can be assured that you can be complete in 2 years. With regard to the Silver Line project and the size and complexity of this project, we're planning for 1 to 3 years of pre-project development work to really make sure that we have our ducks in a row so we can be comfortable going into project development and complete on time. And that includes NEPA scoping, 15 to 30% design. So those are design engineering milestones. We're just getting ready to begin the 15%. So we have only been at a very conceptual level of engineering so far. And an anticipated draft environmental impact statement. Once we enter into project development, then we would be really progressing that engineering to a much more final level, leading to a 65% level, which is really a completion of the plans necessary to begin real estate acquisition. And that process takes about 2 years. As part of that, we'll also be completing our final environmental impact statement, and record of decision. Other environmental milestones would be necessary to begin buying right away. That work really begin towards the end of project development. So we get a lot of questions about real estate, and I just want to kind of bracket that timeline. Regarding project engineering, that's kind of once you complete all the project development, you're now into the kind of the final steps of the federal process before you go into construction. So you're completing your specifications, you're seeking a full funded grant agreement, which is the kind of the contract that you have with the federal government to pay for some percentage of it before you enter into construction. Depending on the scope of the project, that could be 5 to 8 years. Just for a frame of reference, the Blue Line extension, which we opened in 2018, took about 10 years, and it was a little over a 9-mile project. So that's about a frame of reference for what we might be talking about on the Silver Line. After construction, then we're into operations, maintenance, revenue service, all those activation activities that are required. So where we are on the LYNX Silver Line right now is we're really kind of squarely in pre-project development. We've completed over the last 18 months an LPA refinement, working with our partners, stakeholder partners, and jurisdictional partners along the entire limits. We've identified a number of TOD opportunities through the TOD program led by John Howard. We've completed early scoping, and we have an MTC adopted or refined locally preferred alternative. We're in the kind of the phase 2 of our contract work, which is really leading into a 15% engineering drawing set for review. And that includes some technical studies and station area planning, also in further study on the rail trail and how it can be incorporated into the LYNX Silver Line design. And part of that, we're really progressing some preliminary designs and really beginning the environmental field work. A number of folks may have received letters from us saying that we're commissioning that environmental field work. So that really is doing some of the field work to evaluate any sort of natural resource issues or any sort of historic property issues along the limits of the corridor. So if you received that letter, it should give you a good outline. If you have any questions, feel free to call me on my numbers on that letter. So before we kind of get into the proposed refinements, kind of zoom back for a minute to think about, how we've kind of narrowed down the locally preferred alternative to the refined locally preferred alternative. And it's really a comparison of benefits and risks. So we're looking to maximize the benefits and minimize the risks on the project. So we want to make sure that we have a project that has a good travel time, that has good local connectivity, meaning people can get from wherever they're going or where they're coming from to the station and to wherever they're going afterwards. And then we want to seek to create good development opportunities to create those great places around our stations. But we want to balance that against risks. We're seeking to come up with a project that we can implement, operate, and maintain. So part of that, evaluation is an evaluation of cost, environmental considerations, and trying to make sure we're creating a project that is environmentally sensitive as possible, and then make sure that we're well coordinated with others up and down the line, all while we're doing a heavy dose of public engagement. So as far as the decision tree for how we kind of evaluate one option versus another, again, we're looking for the least risk and the most benefit. If those two things are the same thing, if we feel like the least risk option also provides the most benefits, then that's the easy button. That's the option that we would pursue. If those things are not the same, then it's really a question of evaluating, does the option with the greater benefits have acceptable risks? Are we willing to accept the risk to achieve the benefit? And with that, it could be a situation that maybe the risks outweigh the benefits, and we kind of look at each one of those choices in that way. And so sometimes we pick the most benefit and say we'll accept the risks, and sometimes it's the other way, and the risk's too much, and we to achieve the benefit. So when we looked at the proposed refinements, we kind of continued to look at them in that lens as we did over the last 18 months. And so I'm going to briefly go through the 5 potential refinements. Some of them are more complex than others, so I'll try my best to try to get through them as quickly as possible and focus on the ones that are more complex. So the first one is regarding a shift in a station. This is one of the more simpler ones, the more straightforward ones, and it's really about shifting the station near Suttle Avenue along Wilkinson Boulevard. This would be on the west side. If folks can see on the right side of the screen, you see like a red line through the Suttle station with a red X. That's where the station was as adopted in April. However, we're proposing to shift that station further to the west to near Moorhead Street and near what would become the proposed Berryhill station. And the main reason that we are proposing this adjustment is really to improve access. People who are familiar with Wilkinson Boulevard know that after Moorhead Street, Wilkinson becomes more of a limited access, almost like a freeway operating environment as people start to ramp up to get on 277 or 77. So because of that and the limited access opportunities at Suttle Avenue, that we feel like moving it back to Moorhead provides a better opportunity for folks to cross at a signalized intersection to get from Wesley Heights and other neighborhoods to a station rather than to have to traverse some pedestrian bridge system at Suttle Avenue, which could be done, but is not very appealing for folks. It also provides a deeper parcel depth for potential development opportunities around the stations. So with that, our recommendation is to shift the Suttle Avenue station to Berryhill to improve access and development opportunities. The next proposed refinement is about adding a new station at Summit Avenue. So the station in the middle is one at Summit Avenue. This is actually one that was previously evaluated and set aside, and it was primarily set aside because of the limited access opportunities. There are Norfolk Southern Railroads directly adjacent. There's the 277, 77 interchanges right there. There's private development occurring that's building new roads, and the interchange is likely to be rebuilt in the future. So because all those, that that infrastructure really limits the accessibility of the station. However, we did receive some feedback from the Wilmore and the Gold District folks, and as well as through the TOD program, that there is some benefits to evaluate at this potential station. So we kind of think that adding the station back and continuing to coordinate to potentially allow access to the station from the community and from the neighborhoods is something that's worthy of continued study and continued evaluation. So our proposal is to add the station back and continue to work with the parties in the area to try to achieve an access plan that works. If we can't achieve an access plan that actually gets people to the station, we may have to reevaluate this in future phases. Just because if people can't walk to the station, then there's no ridership and therefore there's no station. So I think it's something that we want to add in to continue talking with folks, but I think there's certainly some risk that it could be reevaluated in the future if we can't achieve that access plan. So with that, we do plan to add the station with some caveats back and continue to evaluate in the future. The next proposed refinement is another new station, and this would be for a new station in First Ward. So this station would be directly between Caldwell and Davidson Street, and it would be an aerial station. This is something that also came out of the TOD workshop and in public feedback for a potential, to serve a potential station to serve the Garden District and First Ward. So we have evaluated, and there are certainly some benefits to the Garden District and First Ward community regarding quality of access. You're making it a little easier for them to access the station. It's kind of a similar spacing as some of the other uptown stations. And there's also some potential development opportunities that might come of it to kind of catalyze some development on the north and the south side of the Brookshire Freeway. So a lot of that came out of the TOD program and provided a good impetus to evaluate adding the station. However, there are trade-offs. It is an aerial station, and I'll go to the next slide. It is an aerial station, so meaning it would be more costly than an at-grade station. So certainly it's not an insignificant amount of cost, but there are quite a few benefits. We have evaluated this with some of the folks at a First Ward community meeting, and there seemed to be some interest and excitement about it, with some, certainly some concerns about what a station might mean to as far as noise or access or light, those sort of things. And I think that's something we'll continue working with the community on. But we feel like that the potential benefits as far as access, quality access, and development opportunities kind of outweigh those risks. Another thing that was noted also at a recent council meeting was some concerns about delay in travel time. We think that adding the station will add about a minute to a minute and a half of overall travel time, and again, I think the access and the development opportunities in our opinion, outweigh that minor risk. So with that, our proposal is to add the station, add a new station in First Ward. Refinement, our alignment refinement 4 is regarding an alignment adjustment near the Golden Green Hotel. This is out near the Coliseum Oven Station. So this would be a proposed minor shift. So this would be a very, very small alignment change, but it would be a change that would avoid impacting a hotel called the Golden Green. So the initial alignment did have an impact of the alignment. There was a lot of conversations we had with the owners and also the potential redevelopers of the site. There's a active redevelopment, adaptive reuse being planned for the site to encourage affordable housing and facilitate affordable housing on the site, which squarely sits within some of the city's goals, broader goals for facilitating affordable housing and transit corridors and within the broader city. So with that, we feel like that there's a lot of benefit, community benefit towards enabling the opportunity to have the Golden Green Hotel reused for affordable housing. There's also a significant cost savings by not having to acquire and demolish a rather large structure. That would be, a costly endeavor. However, the trade-off is that the alignment does shift a little bit closer to the neighborhood on Fugate Avenue. So there would be a little more residential real estate impact to the community. The magnitude of that is something that we're currently evaluating. and something as we get into design more, we'll know a little bit more about what that magnitude might be. But again, it feels like having the opportunity to facilitate the redevelopment of the site and to have that cost savings outweighs that relatively minor impact. So with that, our recommendation is to shift the alignment eastward towards Fugate Avenue. And the fifth one, which is the most complex one, and I wanted to kind of spend a little more time on, is about the ultimate alignment configuration along Monroe Road. So the alignment as adopted, and actually this goes back to 2016 when there was a system update, adopt an alignment that was in the median of Monroe, a new median of Monroe Road. And it was running down the middle, similar to the way the blue line runs down Tryon Street. Hopefully, if folks are familiar with that. So that was the starting place in our as we started to pick up our engineering activities. And really, one thing to note before we go down in the details for a minute, but Monroe Road and Tryon Street are very, very different roads. So Monroe Road does not have a median. There's a kind of a running left in the middle, and it's a relatively narrow road between the curbs, somewhere between 60 and 80 feet of right of way between the curbs. So there's not a lot of room to work with. And Tryon Street was a much wider road with an existing median. So there was already set up for kind of those access issues related to a median instead of a new access issue related to adding light rail and a new median in there. So really when we started to look at what it would take to rebuild or to include light rail in the middle of Monroe Road, really have to think about all the utilities that would have to be relocated and all the road construction that would have to be done. So you'd have to completely reconstruct and widen Monroe Road and then remove every utility pole along Monroe Road to facilitate that future extension. We did the similar activities on the Blue Line extension, but the big difference is we had a lot more space to work with. There were still right-of-way widenings required, but there was a lot more space to work with. Monroe Road isn't like that. So when we really laid out what a median running silver line along Monroe Road would look like, we kind of really pretty quickly identified that it's going to be quite impactful to the businesses along Monroe Road and to the real estate. So laying this, conceptual layout on top of it, we feel like that there would be somewhere between 30 to 35 business impacts associated with a Monroe Road widening and, 70 plus real estate acquisitions. So we would be acquiring property from both sides on top of changing access and limiting access, rebuilding everyone's driveways, and having to relocate the cost and community disruption of relocating all the utilities and rebuilding the road. So it's certainly a impactful alternative. So with that, we started looking to see if there were any alternatives which might mitigate some of that impact. And one of the options that really became rose to the top in our evaluation was something we called rear side running. And really what this is light rail running along the rear side or the back side of the first layer of properties along the Charlotte side of Monroe Road. So this would be light rail running along, basically creating a new right-of-way parallel and outside of Monroe Road. We would be avoiding all the disruption, and we're avoiding the community disruption, all the utility relocation, all the change of access from Monroe Road. So there would be a lot less impact to the community and to the business community. There certainly would be business relocations required, but they would be less. And so we feel like that this is a more less impactful alignment. As you can see, the footprint is a little narrower, and it allows people's access to stay the same. It also enables for some better station access. So there's station up at Matthews Township Parkway, which is towards the top, is with this alignment being side running in the town of Matthews, allows for the station to be more closely located to Monroe Road, making it more easily accessed and more visible. So there's some station benefits, so some development benefits of creating a wider block depth for future development, and it also enables most of the businesses to maintain their access along Monroe Road. So with that, our recommendation is to pursue a rear side running alignment and along Monroe Road. So now that we've gone through the 5 refinements, let's transition to a brief conversation about some initial recommendations for proposed implementation and phasing. So one way to kind of start and think about this is why do we need to talk about phasing the Silverline? This is something, we've been talking about the LYNX Silverline as one project from Belmont to Indian Trail for quite some time. That's 29 miles in length. So why do we need to start thinking about phasing? Well, the first thing is really one of the main things is that federal funding is very competitive. So there's very limited amount of federal funding that's available for these projects. And imagining the overall cost and what the share might be for an overall project would be very difficult for the Silverline as a whole to compete to be funded all as one project. So breaking up the project into smaller projects, breaking up the Silverline program into smaller projects allows us to be more competitive, to compete for each one of those projects is more competitive than the bigger one is. Also, a long implementation schedule. We want to be delivering projects sooner. The longer and the bigger the project, the longer it will take to build and implement. So we feel, in general, these projects for every mile, it's about 1 year of time to go from pre-project development to opening day. That kind of jives with the LYNX Silverline, which was about 9 miles long and took about 10 years to open. So that's pretty similar to that, and that's what we see across the industry as well. So it's we want to be able to put projects forward sooner rather than wait for the whole thing and open it in phases. By the nature of it, there's also local and regional commitments will be required. So the Silverline goes outside of Mecklenburg County at this point. It goes in the Gassy Union. So therefore, and outside of Mecklenburg County is outside the Metropolitan Transit Commission, which funds and manages the funding stream for the CAT system. So by the very nature of it, there would have to be a phasing evaluation at this point until those regional commitments are made. And if those regional commitments happen or occur, then we can reevaluate some of this phasing. And those conversations are occurring at a regional level as right now. So I don't think there's any doors are shut for sure. And also, there's a lot of precedent for implementation. The cities of Denver, Seattle, Dallas, and also Utah Transit have done something similar to this, where they've really kind of looked at a big master plan and then figured out a phasing scheme to implement the project. And it helps them do the same things we're shooting for and effectively manage cash flow. It's really hard to imagine having this much money to deliver one project over 20 plus years. It's really easier to break them up from a cash flow and a financial perspective. So now we're talking about phasing, and what are the major considerations? What are we thinking about when we put forward a recommendation? So some of the key ones are really focused and associated with competing for federal funds. Each one of these phases will need to compete for federal funds. And when you think about a particular phase, it really needs to serve a clear purpose. It needs to make sense and be able to operate and stand alone. So it needs to make sure that it's a good project in and of itself. So if we are going from a center city to wherever, that needs to be a good project from a ridership perspective and a cost effectiveness. So it needs to be a good project standalone, and we would strive to make each one of the phases be as good of a project as it can be, as good of a standalone project as it can be. And also, again, back to project length and schedule, we want to make sure we're putting projects that are, we feel like we can implement within reasonable lengths and durations, and that every phase also needs to have a maintenance strategy associated with a storage yard, because with the opening of the phase A, we will be accepting and commissioning a brand new fleet of light rail vehicles, meaning that we need to make sure that there is a place for those vehicles to go. The LYNX Blue Line has 2 maintenance facilities, and they're really at capacity and really not able to accept new vehicles. So a maintenance facility will be required for the phase A whenever that occurs. So it's just one thing we always need to keep our minds on. So just to kind of jump right into our initial recommendation. So our initial recommendation for phase A is really to go to the southeast, and that would be from Charlotte Gateway Station the big multimodal center, which is currently being planned and designed. To the southeast into the town of Matthews. In the town of Matthews, we have 3 options that we're evaluating. One is to go the whole way to CPCC Levine, and that would be all the 4 stations in Matthews and all stations that would be as far as we can go within Mecklenburg County, and then also one in downtown Matthews. And it's something we work closely with the town on over the last 18 months to come up with an alignment that makes it to downtown. And then also one at Matthews Township Parkway, which would be right along Monroe Road as soon as we cross into the town of Matthews. So we're working with the town on that. There's other conversations occurring about other potential phases, or terminus, but these are the 3 we're looking at right now. And we'll go into a little bit of detail on pros and cons of that in a minute. To the west, we would go with our Phase B, and that would be Charlotte Gateway Station to I-485. Regarding other phases, and so that's where we're saying that anything beyond the MTC or beyond the initial Phase A and Phase B will require those sort of regional funding requirements. Again, if we can achieve those agreements and those commitments, we could potentially these phases may be reevaluated. And so I think the door is open to continue having those regional conversations as we continue progressing the Silver Line. At a high level, the phasing recommendations, just kind of a breakdown like this. And one thing to note is one of the rationale for going to the southeast first is that we achieve our preliminary ridership is a lot higher to the southeast. The travel market is more conducive to transit service on the southeast corridor. So our ridership is about twice that of the west side. And that's one of the primary reasons to go to the southeast first, so we can really kind of put our best foot forward as far as a project that can compete for federal funds. So the CPCC Levine is about 15 miles long, so the longest project, but also the most ridership, we think. Option 2 is downtown Matthews at about 13, and option 3 is about 12 miles to Matthews Township Parkway. And then Phase B is about 7 miles from Charlotte Gateway Station to I-485. And as you see, all that kind of the key destinations that we serve in each one of the alternatives. So just a brief overview of the options in downtown in Matthews. So the pros of the CPCC Levine is that it reaches all the destinations. We hit all the 4 stations in the town of Matthews. There's ample space for a terminus park and ride and any associated facilities that we might need. So there's lots of space there to do what we need to do at the terminus. It is the highest cost terminus option because it's the longest. A lot of structures. You have to go over the railroad and under 51 and then over 485. So there's a lot of more structures there. So it's, of course, a high cost. And from a terminus perspective, it does have limited access from interstates, from 74, Monroe bypass, and 485 has a more circuitous route to get to the station than some other terminus park and rides that we have. Option 2 is downtown Matthews. It's a lower cost alternative than CPCC Levine because it's somewhat shorter and doesn't have to cross over the highway. But it does reach downtown Matthews as a key destination, which was an initial goal over the last year and a half. It does miss ridership and development opportunities at Sportsplex and CPCC, but it does create a challenge for extending it to CPCC Levine in the future because short projects like that are difficult to justify with limited benefits and relatively high costs. So a short extension of that would be more challenging. And then option 3 is to Matthews Township Parkway. So this is our lowest cost option that we're evaluating right now from a terminus. It does have good auto access to the terminus park and ride, but it does miss ridership generators and development opportunities in the rest of downtown. So we miss the benefits of making it through the rest of downtown Matthews and Sportsplex and CPCC. And then there's also the same issue is the difficulty in extending this in the future. So as far as our next steps go, right now we're in that fall timeframe doing the focused neighborhood meetings and public engagement. This is our second public engagement. We had the first one last night. And so coming up, we'll be after we receive all the public input, we'll be compiling that and going to a public November MTC information, and then receive any feedback from the MTC, and then a January MTC adoption. All the while we're continuing to do our environmental field work, our preliminary design work leading towards a 15% and ongoing and additional engagement. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Julianne to go over the steps for engagement for the public as part of this round.
Thanks, Andy. All right, so public engagement. This is the most important part of what we're doing here today. After we're done with this presentation, I urge everyone who's here in attendance to visit ridetransit.org/links Silverline. That will take you to this page that you see here. When you get there, you'll click on Online Open House. Then if you'll hit Next, Andy, that will take you to this screen here. When you're at this screen, you can click either of the links highlighted in red to access that survey. And on that survey, you'll be able to provide feedback on what we've presented here today. Here's another opportunity for you to click the link for the online open house to provide feedback you have from right now until November 3rd. If you do not have, if you could go back one more time. If you don't have access to the internet for whatever reason, you can actually text Silverline to 704-461-4441. Please share that information with your neighbors or family members who might not be able to join meetings like this in the future, and they're able to still provide their input. Right now, you can go forward. So let's get into the question and answer session of our presentation today. To submit questions, you're going to want to log into your YouTube or Gmail account, and you'll type your questions in the chat box. We've already had quite a few come through, but for those who haven't, you have a few minutes to log in and think of what questions you would like to ask. So we will get started with our first question to Andy. All right, the first question is that we're getting a lot of questions from residents who live adjacent to the future LYNX Silverline. Can you discuss the timing of the real estate acquisition process?
Yes, thank you. That's one of the most common questions that we get. So to just kind of step back for a second, at this point, we have a conceptual alignment at this point. So our alignment, is adjusted often. We're continuing to work to make it better and try to make it the best project that we can make. So because of that, the design is really conceptual. We don't exactly know what the real estate needs are on any particular property at this point. We based on our current concept, we may have some early indications of what that might be, but we're certainly very far away from knowing exactly what's necessary on properties. We do, we will need to know that, and we are progressing our design so we can know that. So one of the first things that we really need to do is really to fully understand what the design is and what is necessary to build the project, operate, and maintain the project. So as we can continue that design, I think that design process will take us anywhere from 3 to 5 years to really have a good understanding for what the needs of the project are, and that will include, detailed grading plans and drainage and utilities and everything that's going to be required to have that would influence the footprint of the project. On a parallel track, there's also the environmental process. So for us to acquire property, not only do we need to know what we need to buy, we also need to have the environmental clearances, meaning we'll need to have looked at it, the entire corridor. And part of that is some of that environmental field work that we sent the letters out and that we addressed earlier. So we can't even begin to buy right away until we have what's called a record of decision, which is kind of the environmental clearance that this project it has completed the federal environmental process. So once we know what the property that we need by commencing with design, and we have the environmental clearance, then we can start reaching out to people, specific property owners, and making offers to acquire property that's necessary for the project. So we'll send, if we need property from anyone's property that they own, we'll make an offer. We'll send out an agent to contact you, and then it'll be kind of a negotiation on that. So I'd say that could be anywhere from 4 to 6 years, maybe longer, depending on the timing of funding and the timing of how the project goes and how big of a project we are actually implementing through our first phase. So I wanted to kind of give a little frame of reference because we got a lot of questions last night, and we may have some questions about that today to know that we're not ready. We don't know exactly what the property needs are, and we're not going to know for a while exactly what's necessary, and it's going to be quite a while before we're ready to make offers and start acquiring property.
Thank you for that, Andy. Good comprehensive answer. But of course, like you said, we may get some more specific questions about property acquisition that we'll address as we receive them. All right, the next question is, what is this project team doing to plan for equitable growth, including mixed income housing, along the future LYNX Silver Line? And for that, we'll toss it over to Mr. John Howard, who is leading this project transit-oriented development effort.
Thanks, Julianne. Yes, so as part of our TOD planning study effort, we do acknowledge that we did not plan proactively for affordable housing or mixed income housing along the Blue Line. So as part of our effort now, we are creating an affordable housing strategy within our plan for mixed income and affordable housing around the stations along the Silver Line. So we have a very broad team, including Housing Neighborhood Services from the City of Charlotte, as well as a sub-consultant who's a housing expert to help us craft those strategies and policies so we can look at ways we can, again, plan ahead for having more mixed income and affordable housing within walking distance of our stations. Along the Blue Line, we are seeing affordable housing being developed now. Granted, it's some years after it's in operation, but we've got over 200 units or so along the Blue Line extension, either under construction or coming online. And we have another group of projects along the Blue Line from Skelly Bark on down that are now starting to come online. So we are seeing housing starting to become developed now along the Blue Line. But again, for Silver Line, we're looking at doing that planning work sooner than later.
Thank you for that. All right, our next question, I think we'll go back to Andy. The question is, what is the anticipated or design headway for the Silver Line? And will the stations be designed around 2-car trains or 3-car trains?
Oh, that's a great question. Now you're speaking my language. So we're looking at it's likely to be a 10-minute headway. I mean, I think we will design the signaling system to do better than that. So, but I think if we were to look at it, a 10-minute headway, I think we could easily do a 7.5-minute headway if we decided as well. And we will be designing the system for a 3-car platforms. And that's not to say that we will be operating 3-car trains on opening day, but we are certainly designing our light rail system for 3-car systems consistent with the Blue Line extension.
Great, thank you. Next question. Are there plans to add a pedestrian overpass for those coming across Independence to the proposed Village Lake stop, or improved walkability to the rail for those near Mason Wallace Park?
That we are, I mean, I'd say a couple things. So as part of our public engagement, that's kind of a reoccurring theme we've heard over the last 2 years of, trying to create pedestrian connections over Independence Boulevard, and right now it's, very difficult to make those moves as a pedestrian. None of the bridges have been really designed. The road bridges have been designed all that well to accommodate pedestrians. And so we do have in mind that we're going to be evaluating certain pedestrian bridges in certain areas. So the Silver Line may be part of some of that answer, but there will also anticipated to be a complementary infrastructure program which will evaluate other types of access improvements. So the Silver Line might be able to install some things that are necessary for the project, but there will also be general connectivity that will be evaluated and it based on recommendations to the TOD program, and then ultimately implemented by the city and or the county as part of network improvements and infrastructure improvements in this area. So I can't say specifically for that location that you're talking about that's one of the areas that we've talked from a Silver Line perspective, but I do think there will be a process in the future to talk about where those areas that the broader city should be evaluating pedestrian connections across Independence Boulevard. But I think it's from a city's perspective, it's loud and clear that we've got to really think through how pedestrian access across Independence Boulevard is going to work.
This next question is related to Shenandoah Avenue. And the question has two parts. The first is, will there be a barrier wall between the light rail and houses on the other side of the street? And or how will the houses on Shenandoah be impacted by the future alignment?
Yeah, so the first question is, we don't really know exactly if a wall will be installed. We understand that there's a wall today. I think as we get further into our design process, we're going to know more about what the footprint of the project is and how that wall might be affected. And also in the future, as we do our environmental studies, we'll be doing noise and vibration studies, which might influence the decision to do a wall or not do a wall. I think we'd also want to have some conversations with our partners at NCDOT about that particular location. Regarding the houses on Shenandoah, so the alignment as it is drawn right now does have some pretty severe impacts to some of those homes along Shenandoah. We've had some conversations with folks who lived on Shenandoah. It's difficult to say whether in the end it will be 100% a relocation. I think as we continue with our design process, we'll know more about the certainty of that acquisition, and we'll be reaching out to the folks who live on Shenandoah and in other places along the corridor to try to start solving some of those solutions and some of that acquisition.
Great, thank you, Andy. This next question definitely relates to the LYNX Silver Line, but is more pointed for NCDOT. So we do have partner and colleague, Mr. Stuart Basham, on the panel today. So I'm going to ask him if he can respond to this question in particular. The question is NCDOT actually planning a toll road down Independence? And when will that project be discussed?
Thank you, Julianne. There has been in the MPO's long-range plan a plan to construct express lanes on Independence Boulevard for some time. We funded the project in 2016 to begin looking at the Independence Boulevard corridor from Uptown to Matthews for implementation of express lanes. That project currently is in the early stages of concept design. The costs have been found to be rather excessive, so we're looking at the project as a whole with the local stakeholders group, with the town of Matthews, the city of Charlotte, the Charlotte Regional Transportation Planning Organization, and NCDOT. That project is currently under evaluation with the local stakeholders group. We're in the process of segmenting it and figuring out how to best deliver that project over perhaps a longer period of time. The schedule for that project will be determined once the process is complete with the local stakeholders group, and that will probably be sometime toward the end of this year or perhaps early next year.
All right, thank you for that update. And we'll just end with one last question. And this one we'll shoot back over to Andy. The question is, recently in the news, dates have been shared for completion of Phase A and Phase B. Phase A slated for 2036 and Phase B in 2039. In February, we had presented that the estimated construction completion was 2030. What caused this change?
Yeah, so yeah, that's a good question. So really, one thing to talk about is really when we started having the 2030 time, we were trying to be consistent with delivering of the 2030 plan. That's always been the goal of the organization, to deliver as much as we can within the 2030 plan time horizon. Really, when we started to get into the details of the design, the construction, and the challenges associated with it, along with the financing, which is a big part of it, the financial planning and the financial modeling of it, it really caused us to look a lot more deeply at the schedule and what it was actually going to take to operate and to actually begin that operations. So really, because it was kind of more of a kind of trying to achieve a broader goal of tying to the 2030 plan. And then when we really started to get into the details of it, that we feel like that the actual realistic opening date is going to be further out than that 2030 horizon. Now, I mean, we're going to be seeking to come up with different mechanisms and different approaches to improve that. So I know 2036 and 2039, those are general dates right now, but we're going to be, as we proceed with design and start talking about different delivery methods and different ways that we're actually going to deliver the project, we're hopeful that we can deliver it sooner than that. And that will tie into, again, the financial planning, the phasing, and the ultimate delivery method and construction. What is the project so we're moving forward and when? So I hope that answers the question. It's kind of really getting into the weeds, and it's the kind of the devil in the details stuff that kind of drive that opening day.
Thanks for that, Andy. And with that, we will wrap up our Q&A. Andy, if I could ask you to share our contact slide just once more.
Yep, if I can find it.
All right, and if you did submit a question and we were not able to respond to it within our time limit today, please email that question to linksilverline@publicinput.com. Here you'll see every way that you can communicate with this project team. As a reminder, the survey, which can be found on the online open house at ridetransit.org/linksilverline, is up until November 3rd. So you have until November 3rd to respond and provide us with some feedback. If you prefer to talk on the phone, you can either call CAP's customer service there at 704-336-RIDE, or you can provide your comments directly to us via voicemail. And that phone number is shared directly here at 704-461-4441 with the code 6636. But if you would prefer mail, that is certainly an option as well. You'll mail that directly to me here at Charlotte Area Transit System. Our address is 600 East 4th Street. So again, thank you to everyone for joining us over your lunch today. Hope you found some value in our updates that we were able to provide you. Please, I urge you and your neighbors to provide feedback through our online survey. And if you would like to schedule a more intimate conversation with your respective neighborhood or community group, we're certainly accommodating to those as well. So again, these are the means of communication to reach out to us. And we look forward to hearing from many of you over the coming months. Thank you.